Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our webinar on SDG Alignment for Businesses. Today's webinar is being held as part of our Governance and Philanthropy Programme, which was developed in 2017 to build standards and best practices for giving across the Gulf region. The scope of the programme has grown year on year, and today we're focusing on supporting corporate and institutional donors striving to be more strategic and impactful in their giving. To support the programme's vision and mission, we recently launched The Circle, an online platform as a one-stop shop for all these resources organisations need to plan and manage their corporate donations. We have just launched The Circle, and it is a platform that we intend to continue to populate. So I do urge you to have a look and familiarise yourself with it. Hopefully, even now, you'll find some tools relevant for yourselves in your current endeavours. The website URL is http://circle.pearlinitiative.org. And you can also access that through our main website. So please, when you get an opportunity, do use that. And if you have any feedback or any kind of resources that you think might be of value that we could potentially support with providing and putting out there, also get in touch with myself or the rest of the team. Lemia Adi is currently responsible for managing the Governance and Philanthropy Programme. And we'll endeavour to see how we can support the ecosystem even greater. So as we continue to align our work with the global discourse, this webinar will highlight how organisations can best align their work with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals to achieve greater impact. Projections demonstrate an annual funding gap of $2.5 trillion, and this is unfortunately pre the current crisis. With the volume and magnitude of giving across businesses here in the Gulf region, the potential for greater impact is immense. Joining us today to share their insights and knowledge are subject matter experts Ayla Bajwa, founder of Ampuz, and Delma Ramirez, operations manager at Ampuz. Ampuz is an impact and sustainability business that uses a unique combination of advisory and technology services to support organizations with reporting, strategy development, thought leadership, stakeholder engagement, and impact measurement. Ayla brings with her 17 years of experience as an international sustainability expert, recognized for her work in designing and running large-scale projects in sustainable development, corporate sustainability, and impact, working with governments, UN entities, and large multinational companies. Ayla's previous positions include serving as a senior advisor to the United Nations Global Compact Local Network UAE, consultant to DP World, and head of sustainability for Shell Hill Group, overseeing group-wide sustainability strategy across the Middle East and globally. As the operation manager at Ampuz, Delma helps in the adoption of sustainable practices through effective data collection, key performance indicator identification, materiality assessments, and technology integration, both internally and with partners. She also supports the adoption of international standards for SMEs, social enterprises, corporations, government organizations, and foundations, GRI, SDGs, UNGC, WEPS, ISO, etc. She's also worked with over 150 different industries to develop sustainable practices. She was previously a standards analyst certifying B corporations for B Lab in the United States. As an analyst, Delma rated over 200 companies and impact funds across the world based on IRIS and GRI frameworks. As with all our sessions, we do ask that we can try and keep them as interactive as possible in the absence of kind of in-person physical interaction. Please do leverage the platform and the portal. You'll see there's an area for you to submit questions to Ayla and Delma. Please take advantage of those. They'll answer them throughout the workshop or might save them to the end. But we've got a wealth of expertise at our fingertips right now, so I urge you, do take advantage. So thank you, Ayla and Delma. We really appreciate your time and efforts in supporting us with delivering this webinar. And without further ado, I would like to turn to our speakers who will walk you through this presentation for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin, for the introduction. Most appreciative. So as Yasmin mentioned, Ampuz is an impact and sustainability company that offers advisory and technology solutions. We work with government entities, private sector companies, and foundations to align their sustainability and impact measurement with their business strategies. Our technology and measurement tools particularly focus on the Sustainable Development Goals. We feel strongly about them. Therefore, we embrace any chance we get to unpack their complexity in order to make them more accessible. We particularly focus on a data-driven approach to them, and we will get more into what that means in the next 30 minutes. We are aware We are aware that all of us are in different parts and different stages of our sustainability journey. And so based on that, we've crafted the content, mindful of that, we've crafted that content. And so we'll start off with a situational analysis. So where are we when it comes to the SDGs? What kind of progress have we been making? A data-driven approach, so really deep diving into the exploration of the targets, going beyond the goals. It's a critical moment in history, and we really need to work carefully through it. And a refresh. So it's 3 years into the Sustainable Development Goals. It is an extremely complex time in terms of COVID-19, and so it's also a time of reflection. How are we going to progress on the SDGs given the current situation? So the Sustainable Development Goals, as most of you probably know, is a collection of goals founded on the guiding principle of no one left behind. And the COVID-19 situation has really turned its head around this UN guiding principle, because it has magnified how the world looks and how the world's paradigm has marginalized great parts of the population. It is, on a positive note, it's a moment for reflection. The sentiment particularly hits home on the topic of the SDGs, as we're in the decade to deliver. So we call this a decade to deliver because we have 10 years left. And so while moving forward, it's good to see what progress we've made. So let's start with the good stuff. We have made considerable strides in terms of poverty alleviation. The largest population to date has now access to electricity and energy, and infant mortality rates are at an all-time low. Having said that, there are challenges. So on to the next slide. There are alarm bells, serious alarm bells, which are only going to be exacerbated by COVID-19. And this is not to be negative, but this is to realistically look at where we stand today. It was a reoccurring theme during the UN General Assembly last year. We need to take a hard look at where we are at. And we can't unless we look at the data. So more than 700 million people continue to live in extreme poverty. 70 million people seek refuge. And if we progress at the rate that we are, we will not fill the gender gap by 2030. Next slide. Next slide. The private sector's role in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals have been firmly embedded in the rhetoric around the goals. It was clear that they needed to be involved from the beginning. And each company the majority of companies embraced the global goals, knowing that they contribute 75% of the global GDP. How can one leave that out? And according to the UN Global Compact Progress Report, and you'll see that I reference the Global Compact frequently, being that we sit on the board here locally, that 81% of companies say they are taking action on the global goals. But in response, what some of our leaders say, for example, Executive Director Lisa Kingo, she's reminded us that that's the challenge that we are today. We have very good awareness, we have a very good start, but definitely need to speed up what we're doing. We have clear tipping points on climate change and social inequalities. So we typically see 3 types of companies. We see companies that have aligned, and these are an elite few, and if you are part of them, you should be proud, that have aligned their strategy, their core, their values to the SDGs. Companies that have terrific partnerships, strategic partnerships that progress the goals would be the second category of companies. And then the third category of companies that speak the language of corporate sustainability, have committed to the Sustainable Development Goals, and in some cases also take an airbrush approach in their annual reporting. But are they really looking at how to progress in tracking their progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals? And next slide. And that brings us to a question.
So how has your organization identified specific sustainable development goals to prioritize? So we're curious to know, based on the information we've provided, if your organization has done so at this stage. Great. So
Yes.
This is a positive response. As many of you can see, 82% have responded with yes. And so this actually mirrors the general observation that organizations have committed to the SDGs and that the UN did a good job in communicating their importance to the private sector. Private sector pessimism. So now this slide becomes interesting because based on the response we received, we can see that the percentage is actually really high and really positive. In a study by Accenture surveying 1,000 CEOs across 21 industries in 99 countries, it is very telling that, as I mentioned, although the private sector is highly committed to the SDGs, the percentage has actually decreased by 3% from 2016 to 2019, while 29% are not convinced that business leaders play a critical role in accomplishing the Sustainable Development Goals target of 2030. And so as we dive into these results and these analysis, we take a data-driven approach to SDGs. So for more than half of the global indicators, data is not regularly collected by most of the countries, or there is no established methodology to measure them. So this lack of methodology and measurement towards the SDGs becomes a disservice to the private sector, as we all recognize that CEOs speak the language of numbers. The UN Global Compact report finds that while 67% of signatories are committing to the sustainability at the CEO level, only 48% are implementing sustainability into operations. That's a 19% gap. And so the question is, why?
And some of the reasons that, so over the course of the last 3 years, we've worked with many of our clients, with government organizations, foundations, and have found some common threads that present challenges towards company engagement, corporate engagement. So number one, the SDGs, if you look at the language, it speaks to countries. This is a challenge, right? So when you go and as sustainability professionals, we go and we have adopted and committed to certain global goals 3 years prior. But how effective were we in looking at the targets and defining them for our organization? And a key reason for that becoming difficult was we take a look and they're speaking to countries, and so it becomes difficult in sort of finding your place in that. third, which is critical, is the standardization of reporting around SDG progress. So we will see that in sustainability reporting, there is respect given to the SDGs. However, progress being made on targets identified around the SDGs are rare to be seen. So in fact, we would urge you to share any reports that actually reflect on specific targets under the SDGs that corporates are looking to progress, and then not only committing to progress on them, but to actually then report on progress. And so really taking a serious and meaningful look at how we're reporting around the SDGs becomes a critical moment for us as corporates to then legitimize ourselves in front of the UN system and in front of our country operations, and integrate ourselves into the SDG progress report that is shared by the SG every year, the Secretary General every year. Because currently the SDG progress we see in the 2019 report is based on government statistical data. So how can we formalize corporate performance around the SDGs? Finance and investment is key, particularly given the COVID-19 situation. We are at a moment where we are reevaluating our investments, we're reevaluating our business models. Now is the time for sustainability professionals to work closely with the finance team, with the mergers and acquisitions team, with the CFO, and really see what are the financial instruments are they looking at in terms of raising capital, and how they can be addressed with the lens of the SDGs. And so historically, those two departments haven't worked very closely together. And now is the time to use this pivotal moment, use the spirit of reflection and spark those conversations and make yourselves relevant within the new normal that we're all about to embark on. And then adopt a methodology of measurement. So with the Global Reporting Initiative, there is some guidance on measurement, but really taking a serious look on the process that is being implemented and making sure that it is followed year on year. So there is concrete information around progress being made specifically to the SDGs. So what we often encourage is creating an alignment between your material topics, if you've undergone a materiality assessment, and aligning that, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. Next slide, please.
So on that note, our question to the audience is, has your organization identified specific targets under the Sustainable Development Goals? And so here, when we say targets, we're referring to the 169 targets that live under the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And if there has been alignment between Sustainable Development Goals that have been identified within the organization to those specific targets. Wow, that's quite a close response. We had 60% say yes and 40% say no. So for the 60%, that's wonderful. We are very happy to see such a proactive group. From our experience, we've seen organizations map to the goals, but not so much to the targets. This is very impressive, so congratulations, and we'd love to look at how some of you have approached this task, as it is very rare. And for the 40% that responded no, don't be discouraged. This practice is actually not common due to the reasons previously mentioned, and we will dive into this topic a bit more within the presentation.
So there were several tools that were introduced about 3 years ago. Well, 3 years ago when the SDGs were launched. So one popular tool was known as the SDG Compass, which looked at how can you create business strategy alignment with the SDGs. And many corporates went through that process, received the buy-in from leadership around the SDGs, collaborated on partnerships with on-ground organizations, and then started reporting on them. And so 3 years in, with this decade to deliver on the horizon, it's a good time to refresh it. So use the same tools, but refresh it and align it to your current status. So perhaps the conversation needs to be elevated. So in terms of leadership, really having a conversation similar to what was mentioned earlier. How are investments looking like? How do we measure? How do we translate some of the targets, and how do we make sure? So it's terrific that the poll shows that, or that all of you are looking at their targets and really focused and have identified which SDG targets align to the business. But how can we look at more public disclosure around that? And perhaps that then becomes an important conversation with leadership. So there's a meaningful commitment. And again, looking at partnerships that exist and evaluating how can we, are all the partnerships progressing on the targets that your organization has identified for yourself, and how can they be tweaked to make sure, or how can they be made more accountable in terms of that data that's being generated, so that at some point you become a data aggregator, which becomes really important as a part of a larger global SDG conversation. And then transparency, we can't emphasize enough the importance of public disclosure. So evaluating, okay, this is how much we're disclosing publicly on our SDG progress within our current reporting. How can we elevate that? How can we be more accountable to our stakeholders around that? So that then UN entities are able to look at this publicly disclosed information and have a better idea on the progress that's being made around the SDGs. Because although the picture that they were painting was rather bleak last year, it may also be that there's just not enough publicly available information that's meaningfully communicated with the right data to incorporate within the progress assessment of the SDGs. And so as corporates, we play a critical role, and we cannot forget that in the wake of COVID-19. Next slide, please.
So SDG alignments. First, we approach this through identification. So we recognize that identifying what's most important for your organization can be challenging. And I'm sure many of you have already conducted materiality assessments in the past, or are looking into them currently. But in the time of COVID-19, we really advise to look at this materiality exercise not simply as a step for reporting, as this is usually what it is used for, but to inform your strategy, to really take a deep dive into understanding all your stakeholders, both internal, external, and see why they find specific material topics important. And so here the contrast of the materiality assessment between qualitative and quantitative data becomes very, very valuable in a time where companies are really having to redefine their priorities. The next step is, of course, the collection process. So collecting data, as I'm sure you know, is really big on engagement. And so consistent engagement of a majority of times, organizations already collect valuable data. And so realizing that some of the data that your organization is collecting currently may already be aligned to specific SDGs. but we simply are unaware yet because it lives in departmental silos and haven't really engaged our entire organization like this before. So through involving teammates in this process, it will help to encourage future data collection and even identify gaps that weren't previously known. And this will also allow for the creation of meaningful indicators, as through the process of collaboration, of internal and external collaboration, you'll probably discover specific indicators that hadn't come to mind before. Additionally, tracking. So tracking progress is synonymous with understanding. So specifically when thinking of SDG alignments, we not only want to think of the what, the who, the when, and the how of our KPIs and our indicators that we're tracking, but how those are aligned with stakeholders regarding the SDGs. So what is being measured regarding what SDG goal and target, who is measuring it internally, and how. So this information will prove essential when beginning to have multiple indicators and particularly when beginning to report. So reporting, as you may know, has become more critical now more than ever. We may have progressed further in SDG progress, but we don't know because there's still not enough data sharing within the private sector. So we strongly encourage this now more than ever, as we realize in the times of COVID that data sharing and information sharing has proven to create vast meaningful impact and actually a ripple effect across the industries. Which brings us to our next question. Have you conducted a materiality assessment for your organization to prioritize sustainability topics? Great, so quite close as well. 43% say yes and 57% say no. So as this has been identified as a really important topic regarding identifying what's most important. For those of you who said yes, that's wonderful. So the same sentiment of now looking at it not only from a reporting aspect and mapping your materiality matrix in terms of reporting and identifying that, but also thinking about it in terms of how your materiality assessment can influence strategy. And those who haven't, we really encourage you to take this approach and to now think about materiality, assessment, not only as a way to communicate with your stakeholders and prioritize internal indicators, but also to redefine priorities as you begin to look into SDG alignment in the time of COVID-19. So kind of taking it a step further, we'd like to ask if you have developed any type of scorecard to track your organization's sustainability key performance indicators. So this is independent of a materiality assessment. So either can answer this. Of course, with the materiality assessment, this process would become easier or clearer, I should say. Nevertheless, we're curious to see if any organizations have tried to tackle this exercise. Great. So majority have responded with no, 63%, and 37 with yes. So once again, wow, wonderful for the 37%. This actually is a quite uncommon task to do, as scorecards with key performance indicators, mapping with SDGs, is quite rare and does require a lot of engagement through various departments and truly understanding the organization's priorities. For the 67%, as you can see, you're not alone. Majority of organizations find this task to be very daunting, as we went over the previous SDG alignment slide. It's quite a process and does require multiple steps to get to this stage.
Yes, and so to wrap up, what becomes really important, just to reflect on what we've gone through right now, is that we're aware of the SDG situation. We encourage using materiality as a way to inform your strategy versus a reporting tool, connecting your materiality topics to not only SDG goals, but also SDG targets, and translating those targets specific to your organization and making sure your leadership has bought in to that. And with that, we want to remind the audience, this is not the time to bail on the SDGs. What COVID has taught us is that we all need a license to operate. As an organization, we will only survive within this current climate if communities see that we are adding value. And so hence this concept of a license to operate was very popular and a constant theme during the UN General Assembly. It is even more valid now. So it's cutting through the extras and really looking at your priorities and where you're adding value and where you can add value based on your business strengths. So looking at the value chain of your organization and seeing where can we integrate SDG targets, and reevaluating the business model, and hence reiterating, looking at your entire value chain, seeing where you can make the most positive impact, where you make the most negative impact, and identify those areas of positive and negative impact through a formal materiality process that will inform your strategy and your reporting. And then to reevaluate how you're raising capital for the organization, but speaking to the CFOs about it, speaking to the subject matter experts about it. And so with that, we hope that we've given you some words, some things to mull over. We are available to to send you any publications that we've referenced during this presentation. We're happy to send that to you. And we're also happy to send sort of a cheat sheet of SDG targets that are popular for corporates to adopt. With that, thank you so much. And we open the floor to questions. Okay, so one of the questions is, do you think if you linked the incentives of CEOs and management to the SDGs, you'd see higher levels of tracking and prioritization of the SDGs? Have you seen this at all? So yes, of course, incentivization monetary incentivization is a catalyst to getting things done. We have worked with CEOs that have these KPIs within the value system. So when the SDGs are aligned with the values and the business purpose, in many of these appraisals, there is a scoring for how you perform against these values. And so yes, we have seen CEOs assessed for their performance based on this. However, this is a very new concept and it doesn't happen often, and when it does, when it's done effectively, it is done when a business has actually integrated the SDGs within their business strategy, because that means that you are progressing on your business objectives while progressing on the SDGs, and so by default the CEO is enjoying higher remuneration based on the success. So that's why we emphasize the tying the two together. Oops.
Hi, it's Lemia here. I'll just go through some of the questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you think companies should focus on one SDG or several?
Yes. So not all 17, but we do advise that several. At least, so it can be one. Look, there's no cookie cutter methodology, but typically it's more than one.
Perfect. Another question here. How do you manage to get buy-in from senior leadership to apply the SDGs and to align them with your business strategy?
Demonstrate the profitability, demonstrate how it makes business sense from a profitable point of view. And hence we emphasize working with the CFO, looking at where are their interests in terms of growth markets, and then advising them. So become an advisor to your CFO and advise them on the long-term benefit to investing in good products. So for example, SDG bonds, green bonds, and reminding them of the license to operate. That if you can link survival of your business to the SDGs, your CEO will listen.
I think kind of a question that links to this came a bit later, but how do you engage other departments to understand the importance of SDGs?
Yes, so change management is always a complex challenge for sustainability professionals. But number one, just the way that the UN was very successful in raising awareness for the SDGs, the sustainability professional has to undertake the same for their organization. But it's going beyond that. It's sitting with each and every department individually and expressing how certain SDGs are relevant to them. Because what ends up happening is departments interpret that this is not something that's relevant to them. So for example, we have clients who had procurement departments that weren't aware of their role, even though they play such a significant role in terms of sustainable sourcing. And so they knew, for example, they knew that, oh yes, our corporate is committed to the SDGs. They have beautiful flyers and beautiful posters all over the organization. But if you actually ask them what is their responsibility, they didn't understand. And hence we have emphasized the targets quite a bit in this presentation, because the minute we sit with, for example, that procurement professional and share the targets relevant to that procurement professional, they have a beautiful spirit that comes out, which is, so we can actually make tangible positive impact through the work of our expertise. And so we then work very closely with them to adjust their supplier code of conduct, look at the international declarations around the UN, and looking at their complete value chain for responsibility to ensure that it's the sustainable supply chain. So that's our two bits. You know, this is what we've observed is successful, really speaking specific language with each department. So you can kick it off with a larger session around the SDGs, but again, we're at a stage where we need to accelerate that and speak to each department in their language and share the deeper level of the SDGs with them. So going beyond the goals.
Yeah, thank you. We've been getting a couple of questions on the COVID-19 situation. So with organizations now, with organizations now struggling with the financial and health impact of COVID-19, and Cervical's key aim over next 2 years, will the sustainability agenda now be parked or number of SDG goals be reduced?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. No, it's quite the opposite now. So the rhetoric that is coming out of the UN, and if you attended the excellent webinar that PI hosted day before yesterday with Patrick Shalhoub and Dr. Dina Asa from the UN resident coordinator, she was very clear. She said that the SDGs have brought to light how the negative trauma of COVID-19 could have been less if the SDGs had been achieved by then. So actually, it's magnified the critical need for the SDGs. So no, they will not be reduced. They will be fully embraced. We have been set back. So unfortunately, the situational analysis that we presented at the beginning of the presentation, showcasing those not so great numbers, will be even more grave come September at the next UNGA. But that makes the need for the hour in terms of corporate behavior more important. Now, again, it's not necessarily going to your CEO and saying, oh, you still have to allocate funds for this. No, it's about elevating the conversation strategically and looking at what are your business priorities? How are they going to, because every CEO is going to reevaluate, and hence we call it a refresh. They're all going to reevaluate according to COVID-19. So just ensure you're a part of those strategic conversations. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically, will the UN revisit the SDGs? And I think you highlighted your point here very well that, you know, in fact, they're more important now than ever.
Yes.
Another question is there a framework to support nonprofit organizations implement the SDGs?
Is there a framework to implement the SDGs? There's a plethora of resources to implement.
For nonprofit organizations, sorry.
Oh, for not-for-profit organizations. Yes, so there are publications. So if you go, if you visit, I always reference the same, but if you visit the UN Global Compact website and the WBSD website, you will find publications specific for not-for-profits. And actually, in one of the studies, sorry, just one last thing, in the studies that have been conducted recently, and this is probably obvious, where people are quite negative. It's unfortunate, but sustainability. So this was a study done specifically for sustainability professionals, and unfortunately, the majority of sustainability professionals don't believe corporates are making strides when it comes to the SDGs, but that not-for-profits and social entrepreneurs are. And so there's a plethora of resources to support them from that perspective.
Interesting. Another question is, once captured, how are the SDGs from individual companies linked to the broader SDG goals and reported at the country level? So I think this is more of a technical question on how the process then works.
Such a good question, though. Such a good question. Because so you may or may not know, but annually, a country that has signed up for the UN SDGs also sign up for what we call a VNR, a Voluntary National Review. And this is an annual report created by the government that presents progress on the SDGs. Now, historically, there has been a disconnect between corporate engagement within this process of the VNR, and hence we brought up the SDG compass with the 3 points: the leadership, the collaboration, and the transparency. Because between leadership and collaboration, what we would suggest is, as a corporate, reach out to the organization in charge of the VNR and adopt a process in which data can be gathered within corporates to then be presented in the VNR. So in the UAE, because this is where we sit right now, the FCSA is the government body that oversees the VNR. And so they do have a private sector council they have put in place to support information in the VNR. However, again, to date, and this is not specifically for the UAE, but generally when the private sector is engaged in the VNR, it's quite anecdotal. And so what the UN has implored to the corporate sector is to identify a means with your local government in reporting in a data-driven manner. And the VNR is presented annually at the UNGA, which is the UN General Assembly. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you for that. Are there simplified measurement tools that can be shared with internal departments to measure their sustainability impact for reporting? And how can we start encouraging departments to be engaged without feeling like they're being forced to do this extra level of reporting?
Yeah, it's like an old age tricky problem where for them often it's an additional piece of work. So if they see the report as a way to also showcase the good work that they're doing, is a good way to frame it with them. Of course, the actual buy-in, so engaging them on the strategic, on a department level, on how every piece of work within their expertise is, if done correctly, progressing on these larger issues. And the easy way to do it, to be completely honest with you, in terms of measuring impact, is technology. So if you have a management tool, a technological management tool, then it just becomes about the department or the department having a user go in and put in data every month, and then that will support your annual report. Otherwise, yes, the more traditional way is using Excel sheets. But if it's done regularly, it's not going to feel like it's so much work. So make an effort to integrate it into their everyday work. So if they are collecting the data, if they know this is the data that is required at the end of the year, what is important is that they're tracking it every month. And they're very clear, and that's why indicators and scorecards are so effective in this process. If you create, everything is about co-collaboration. If you are able to co-collaborate with a department and identify indicators that they are in charge of, and they are aware that their performance is going to be tracked according to these KPIs, then they won't feel so burdened at the end. So they should be a part of the process from the beginning and feel like it's been created with them, as opposed to creating it in silo and saying, now do this. Perfect. Does that help? I hope. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any data on the disparity amongst the different SDGs? That is especially the less popular ones like SDG 16 and 17.
Yes. So we're happy to send you. So is this question, and I suppose we won't know, is this question based on country level information? If it's country level information, we're happy to send, which is publicly available, the 2019 SDG progress report that highlights all 17 SDGs.
Oh, and the disparities among them. That would be very useful.
And
Thank
the
you.
disparities, yes, you'll see all the statistics on them. And there's actually, so we have a data, so it's publicly available. There's a dashboard that shows exactly which region is doing how well on each SDG, and it's very clear. It's a yellow green, yellow green red, so you know which area, in which geographical regions and which global goals are for lack of better words, in trouble or at risk for not being achieved. But at this point, all of them are at risk of not being achieved, which is why we're having this presentation, because it's really important that we all stay on the same boat.
Yep, definitely. How beneficial are the SDGs in comparison with the Millennium Development Goals?
How beneficial? It's a continuation, correct? So the MDGs, so the critical difference between the MDGs and the SDGs is that in the SDGs, the private sector was engaged in the rhetoric from the beginning. So the SDGs had a far wider stakeholder engagement and consensus building process. The first time in history have they engaged that many stakeholders in a process to create consensus around a certain level of goals. So the relevance of the SDGs and the MDGs are equal. One started, they both were looking to achieve a world where no one was left behind. It was perhaps better articulated in the SDGs, but they were both looking to achieve the same thing. Now, the key difference, well, there's several key differences, but two of the popular key differences between the MDGs and the SDGs is, yes, this private sector engagement, and hence it is our reading that the Secretary General and the general UN system is quite disappointed because the private sector was given such a highlight in the SDGs versus the MDGs, whereby the MDGs focused on private, they had just started talking about private public sector partnership around the SDGs, whereby for the MDGs, but for the SDGs, the private sector was put front and center. As you can see, Antonio Guterres making that big statement about the GDP coming from the corporate sector. So that's the critical one. And then global goal 17 on partnerships, where some people say that's the most important goal. And that was something that was not emphasized in the MDGs. So both really important, both looking to achieve the same things, but essentially an evolution.
Sorry, a key point kind of came to mind, because as you were talking, I remembered, you had mentioned that the UN had done a great job at, communicating the goals to the private sector. But I'm just thinking in the context of the Gulf region then, with the multitude of foundations and charitable organizations here, I wonder if it's the case with them as well, that they have been very well educated on the SDGs and that they have been, aligning their work with the Sustainable Development Goals, because I think we might be missing out on, a wealth of giving happening in this part of the world that's not necessarily aligned then with the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes, 100%. That's a really interesting point. We don't, and that's always the challenge with the region. And the Pearl Initiative has been so good with that, is filling the data gaps. We just don't have that information, and usually if we do, it's because Pearl Initiative has run like a really good research or study around it. And so have the global goals translated into the not-for-profit and charity center in the Middle East? Presumably yes, but we don't have the data for it unless you do, Lamia.
I mean, no, I think the King Khalid Foundation have been doing some research on this. I mean, we had a webinar previously with Dr. Natasha Matek, the Chief Strategy Officer, and we were talking about it, but unfortunately, there isn't enough data. They tried collecting data, I think, 2 years ago, and the results weren't very promising, but more research needs to be done. Definitely something we can look into. I think we have one last question here.
Great.
Could you recommend any particular SDGs or specific targets apart from SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, for the construction and building consultancy sector?
Yes. So yes, SDG 11, we have a list. May we, if you put me in touch with this person, or I can send it to you, Lamia, we actually have a list of targets specific for the industry. However, there is an excellent publication, again, I'm referencing UN Global Compact, called the Industry Matrix. And it's called the SDG Industry Matrix. We'll send that to you as well. And that is specific. They have one edition specific for the construction industry. And that would be what we foresee a good guideline for this individual.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's it for our questions today. Thank you. I think you've answered all of them very well. If anyone else has more questions, you can send them through. We'll put you in touch with Ayla and Delma. Thank you very much. If you have any last words, please.
Thank you. No, Lamia, thank you so much for the opportunity. If there are any if any of the members of the audience reach out to you requesting for specific publications that we referenced throughout the presentation, we will send them over happily. And yes, we cannot emphasize enough, please don't drop the ball on the SDGs in the wake of COVID-19. There's a business case for it. We just need to articulate it to leadership. And now is the time, because we only have 10 years to go. So we must take advantage of the spirit of reflection.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who joined us. And we hope you have a blessed Eid and enjoy the break.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.